I guess I'll just start the recording now. Okay, we can just
Okay.
get started whenever.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if we should do some kind of introduction.
It's up
But
to
I feel
you.
like I feel like most people that watch our channels already know what we do.
Yeah.
Um,
In case we got new people coming in, because just to introduce ourselves to anybody potentially new who in case our videos pop up in the recommended and they're like, oh, who's this? So.
sure. Well, do you want to start or should I start?
You should start because you're the you're the
Okay.
guy asking the questions here, and the main video is gonna go up on your channel. So.
For sure. Okay. So my name is Pseychie. I have been playing Gacha games since 2021. My first Gacha game was Genshin. I know, very normie thing to do. After that, I wandered into FGO and played it for 2 years. It wasn't until 2023 that I decided to switch content to making gacha games. I used to run a channel about roguelikes, specifically this one game called Dead Cells. That thing's old news. Okay, I'm just kidding. I still play it every now and then, but it wasn't a live service, so it was about to run out of lifespan eventually. So that's kind of why I made the switch. But now I make general gacha related content, and today I'm here to interview Tuhu about his experiences about being a gacha whale. So I guess that'll go to you now.
All right, what's going on, everybody? My name is ToeSniper98, but you can just call me Tuhu because the first name's a little too long. And I, like Mr. Pseychie has said, am a gotcha whale, or at least I used to be for the bulk of my gotcha career, if you want to call it that. I started playing gotcha games back with the FGO back in 2017 with the launch of the NA server, and I've been playing gotcha ever since, steadily picking up more and more to the point where I can call myself a gotcha god, and nobody can really contest me on that because I'm currently playing a dozen gotcha games and counting because I have more gotcha games that I like to pick up. So, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the podcast, or it's not a podcast. Welcome to the video.
I don't know how much of this will make it on, but
Yeah,
it's fine.
yeah, it's fine.
So I think if you're okay with it, since I'm sure you've been a whale for a long time a bit by this point,
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna put in my thumbnail just like how much in total you have spent. If you're okay with disclosing it, do you have like a rough estimate by this
Yeah.
point?
Um, Total amount over all gotcha games is at this point easily over 100K. If you there was a video that I made like last year by this point. God, it's been a while. It's definitely one of my more viewed gotcha videos, and it went something along the lines of like this is what a gotcha addiction truly looks like. And on that thumbnail, I put like 80K on that. That
Oh
80K
God.
probably yeah, that 80K probably applies just to FGO, to be honest. If we're going to combine everything, it's probably the amount of money I spent on gotcha games overall is probably over 100K. I don't know exactly how much. I probably should, but for the sake of my own sanity, I don't bother knowing what that number is.
That's all right. So I would describe myself as a low spender. I mean, sometimes when I review a game, I don't spend money at all. But I would say the largest I've spent in one gacha game is probably Nikkei in the first year. I probably spent around $200, which I know compared to you, that's like nothing.
I mean,
Yeah.
everyone's got the reasons to spend, and everyone spends however much money as they want. Over my gotcha experience, all the years I've played gotcha, I've seen plenty of different kinds of people spend varying amounts of money. Some people think that oh, even $100 is too much, and you got other people on the other side of the spectrum being like, oh, like you only spent $1,000 on this game. So it goes both ways.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, at least something that a mindset that I have is you constantly monitor how much you're spending because I think it gets dangerous when you start losing track because
Yeah,
that's
of
when you
course.
start blurring the lines of is it gambling or are you just paying for a hobby?
I guess you could see it that way. Um,
Yeah, I don't know if you agree, but that's at least the mindset I have going into these games.
mhm. Uh, I guess overall I have to agree. Yeah, because gotcha games are just basically another form of gambling. Not quite the same, because at least not most of the time, you don't hear about people literally like gotching their way into like literal poverty. Like the
At least I hope not.
yeah, hopefully not. The closest story I've heard of somebody doing something like that is like somebody out in Japan like years ago who said that they literally sold their car to afford gacha pulls for an FGO servant, specifically Skaha. But even in that case, like people sometimes cite that example as like, oh my god, gacha players are so insane. They sell their cars and shit like that. But remember, it's
Hmm.
Japan, and so in Japan, obviously, you don't really need a car, especially if you live in like a big metropolitan area like Tokyo, for example, where public transit is pretty good. Unlike out here in America, for example. So it's like, yeah, if they can afford doing crazy shit like that because we find it crazy because we Americans, we need our cars to get around places most of the time. But yeah, at least it's not like IRL gambling where it's like, yeah, I'm sure we've all heard of like really tragic stories of people going in and literally gambling all their life savings away. It's not to that extent, at least. So I'm
Yeah,
not too
that's true.
sure. I hesitate to compare gotcha roles with gambling, but on a conceptual level, yes, it's akin to gambling. I'll agree with you that much.
Yeah, well, I will say this, because when I played Genshin, I remember the first ever 5 star I've ever gotten in a gacha game ever was Eula. I believe she came out in version 1.4.
Yeah,
So
sometime around that. Yeah.
because I remember by that point I've been playing the game for I think like a month or so, and Genshin, I don't know if they still do this, but looking back on it, it was the only gacha game that as a beginner it didn't give you like a free 5 star, even like a standard one. So when I got Eula, I was like, oh man, I just got a 5 star. That's a
Yep.
big deal.
Yep.
It's kind of like when you're a kid, you get like a super rare baseball card or something that the other kids don't.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what it felt like to me, and that was kind of my first big hit into. Okay, I understand why some people play these games now.
Yep. Yeah, that's a perfectly normal reaction to have. On the topic of Genshin not having a 5 star, just as a side tangent, yeah, I think Genshin still doesn't start you with the 5 star. I think it still has that beginner Noel banner, some shit like that. But yeah, the whole point of gotcha games is to like convince people to roll for their 5 stars because the moment you get one and you didn't have one before, it's truly a like an account changing experience, possibly for some people a life changing experience. Um, I say this like frequently in FGO whenever people ask me stuff about like early game FGO in particular. It's like especially in a game like FGO, if like the experience of playing that game with or like without and then with a 5 star servant is like night and day. Not only because like, oh my god, I finally have the rarest, the highest rarity of character you can have in this game, but also they're just that much stronger. And so I would imagine that I can easily imagine that sort of feeling being present in other gotcha games too. Obviously, not just FGO. So yeah, I totally see what I totally see um, how you felt when you first got your
Mm,
EULA back then.
I see. So I guess that kind of tangent into the first question I wrote down. I know that your first exposure to gacha games was FGO, and as I recall, back then, when it first launched, it had no pity system. The rate up was a 0.7% um, part of a 1% base chance for an SSR.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering then, what was it that kind of made you take the first step in putting money into it? Because there's a common psychological trick. It's not really a trick, but a phenomenon in called the it is called the sunk cost fallacy. Basically, when you spend like even a tiny amount, like even as little as $1, it becomes way easier to spend more. So I guess like is it kind of like a gradual thing that you've experienced, or did you just decided to go all in one day?
So I have to kind of get into specifics of how I started playing FGO, or like the very early days of me playing FGO here. For me personally, I can say this right now: it wasn't necessarily sunk cost fallacy, though. When I explain my story, maybe it can have shades of it, but that's up to you to judge. How I started spending on FGO specifically was for some backstory, one of my IRL friends kept bugging me to try out FGO. Hey, you should try FGO. Specifically, it was talking about the JP server, and I just wasn't very interested at the time until Anime Expo 2017. If you don't know what Anime Expo is, it's the largest anime convention out here in Los Angeles, Southern California, and my friend told me, hey, the NA server is for FGO is going to come out, so it's localized in English. You should at least play that. So I was like, sure, fine. I'll download the game, I guess. Because in my mind, I was like, okay, I guess it'll give me something to do while I'm waiting in line for stuff, right? Just to pass the time. And so I
Yeah.
downloaded it, made an account, blah blah blah, re-rolled until I got Saber as my first 5-star. Because you could do that back then. Not sure how easy it is to reroll now, but whatever. Anyways, so yeah, that's exactly what I did. I played FGO throughout the con during 2017, just when we had downtime or when we were waiting in line, so on and so forth. And turns out I really enjoyed it. I really liked playing FGO. It was very different. It was a very different game that I had never experienced before. I thought it was really cool that you can control these servants and you play like a turn-based game type thing, and it seemed really cool, and I got really super into it. I started grinding it quite a lot because in FGO, at least the first your first like week or so at least of the game, you can keep playing it like basically infinitely, because as long as you kept playing like the 40 AP daily quests that give you a lot of XP at once.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
remember how in FGO, if you level up your account level, the game refunds your entire stamina bar. So I just kept doing that over and over and over and over. So that way, that was how I was able to play throughout the entire con. Basically, just in essence, free infinite stamina, which that's not how the game normally is, but for the first couple of days you play, that's certainly what it feels like. And so
Yeah.
by the end of the con, I had invested enough time and effort into it, so I was like, okay, I can justify putting in some money. And so the plan, was only ever to spend a little bit of money. Let's say 1 or 2 packs here or there, and I say a little bit, but yeah, every every biggest pack is what $80, and that price hasn't changed to this day. So
Yeah.
I remember the first time that I spent money on FGO was after the con was over. Me and my boys, the group that I usually went to Anime Expo 2 back then, we're hanging out at this Korean barbecue restaurant just to celebrate the end of the con. And once we were done eating, I was like, all right, time to do it. Whip out my phone, and I put in my first $80 pack and start rolling, right? And that's how it started.
Oh.
That's how they get you. However, the reason why I kept spending was because I realized I really like collecting characters. That's my tick for me. I really enjoyed the feeling of obtaining new characters and then grinding materials to get them like all invested and stuff. I'm a little bit different from most players, most gacha players, because I would assume, my assumption is that most gacha players, or at least a lot of them out there, like rolling gacha for the sake of rolling, right? Because obviously gacha rolls tap into the you probably know this better than I do on like a psychological level.
Yeah,
But
like that dopamine rush,
yeah,
you mean?
exactly. It
Yeah.
appeals to our dopamine rush, our perhaps you could call it our primal psychological like desire to find like fancy new stuff, right? Because of survival instincts and whatnot. We can, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But yeah, like I could say that most gacha players like rolling gacha because of that. For me, however, I just wanted to get new characters so that I could grind for them, get them all leveled up, and be able to use them in battle, and as an extra little perk, flex them to my friends, and hey, here's what I have that you don't, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
The whole flexing part kind of wore off after a while, especially after I joined, for example, the FGO subreddit Discord back in the day, and I realized, wait a minute, like I'm not hot shit. Right, and there's plenty of other whales out there who have spent so
Mm.
much more money than me, and I could never hope to reach their levels of swag in this game. So
Yeah.
that wore off real quick. But my desire to obtain new characters and then level them up and then be able to use them in a fight, so so I could see what they were made, to see what they could do. That never changed, and so that has always been my primary motivating factor of rolling or spending money on gacha games, is to primarily obtain new characters, not necessarily for the dopamine rush of rolling gacha in and of itself. So I actually had a purpose in that. I'm not sure if that's exactly like some sort of higher purpose. It's probably not, but that's my story.
I see. Because I actually had a couple buddies playing FGO. I mean, back in 2017, that would have been when I was still in high school. But
Yeah.
basically, I look because I took a couple glances at the game, and I just saw that there were these like 2D sprites, and I was just thinking there like, why would you ever spend money for this? It's just pixels on a screen. So I guess well, when you said that you wish to roll for completion's sake, is it something because you had investments in the Fate universe, or just because it happened to be like the gacha game that you already tried?
It wasn't necessarily because of the Fate universe. Like I was well aware of the Fate IP, or the general Nasuverse, as we in the business like to call it. Um, so I had watched the animes. I was familiar with the original Fate Stay Night visual novel. Even I even read like a part of it too. I didn't finish it though. But FGO made me realize from a gacha perspective, not from a Fate perspective, just from a gacha perspective, that I just really enjoyed collecting new characters. So no, I'd have to say it wasn't necessarily a Fate thing. It was more that
Hmm.
having played a gacha game, which happened to be related to Fate, but having played a gacha game, now it's like, okay, like now I've learned something about myself, that when it comes to gacha games, I just really like collecting characters.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at least from my perspective, I think if you're a whale, it automatically gives you a lot of authority over over a game within the community because you have information that others don't. Because if you take a look at rolling high constellation characters in Genshin and getting their weapons, if you have that kind of data and you basically chart out, okay, how much power is your money getting you every time you roll a dupe or whatever. I think as a whale, it puts you at a really unique situation or a unique perspective that most other players don't. So I'm wondering, like, do you think being a whale like automatically gives you a lot of authority in a community?
No, absolutely not. The problem with that statement, I'm not saying that it's a wrong opinion or anything. However, it's definitely not always the case. The simple reason is that I'm gonna be very blunt here. Gacha players are fucking stupid. That stupidity,
Yeah,
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 it,
okay.
it sounds funny when I say that, but like having been a part of gacha communities for a very long time, um, the fact that you spend money on gacha alone does not automatically give you this sort of authority that you're talking about. That, oh, you automatically know more than, like, say, a free to play does. That is definitely not true. Money and knowledge can be tied together, but that assumes that whoever's spending the money has two brain cells to rub together to figure out what the hell they're doing. Um, and I don't need to tell you, hopefully, that that's not always the case. There are plenty of whales out there who spend money either for content's sake, or they just really like the characters. They don't really give a shit about what exactly it is that they do inside a gacha. Matter of fact, well, I don't want to generalize here. I don't want to pull out random statistics and say my sources that I made it up. But I can definitely tell you that not all whales I would look at and say, okay, yeah, he has the authority to speak about this game on a level that maybe people who don't spend money on this game, on this gacha, might not. That your statement has to be taken on an individual case by case basis, um, because there are plenty of whales out there who spend money and have no idea what they're doing. But also, there are also whales out there who do spend a lot of money and do know what they're doing. It just kind of boils down to what those whales like want out of the game. Do they just want the characters? And that's all they give a shit about, or like, do they actually play the game and like know what they're doing?
Yeah. I mean, because at least what makes me think that is,
Mm-hmm.
let's say if you're like a free to play or low spender,
Right.
because you have to pick and choose who to pull and what you pull, you don't have the luxury of like even if you happen to know a lot about the game mechanics, you can't really do like a charted graph of how much power does one dupe give you, or how much power does pulling the signature weapon give you. So at least from my perspective, it's because the reason at least I believe that, but I think by your explanation, I think it's not always true anymore. Is
Yes,
because as a whale, you have access to this information, whereas most other players don't.
that kind of used to be the case, especially with older gotchas. Sure. However, and especially back then when a lot of players didn't know what they were doing. Because obviously when a gotcha game first comes out, right, it takes a while for players to figure out, okay, like this is the optimal way to play, this is the meta, and like this is what's going on. Like we need time to figure out what the hell we're doing in a gotcha game, right? Depending on the
Mhm.
gotcha
Yeah.
game and depending on how big it is, like player base wise. So you have more players like analyzing and scrutinizing what's going on inside the game. It can take longer, shorter, or longer. But yeah, I would say that's not necessarily the case anymore. Like, if I were to be more blunt, I would actually just straight up disagree. I mean, you came from Genshin, so I'll explain it to you in Genshin terms. These days, especially these days, we got theory crafters. We have the people I like to call the smart boys, who go into the game, look at the stats, the numbers that we know are given, either through leaks or like whatever MiHoYo themselves have officially put out, and they theory craft. They punch numbers in, they figure stuff out, and they can come up with they can analyze like characters who aren't even in the game yet, to tell their viewers, to tell the community at large, hey, this upcoming character seems like they'll be pretty good, or I don't know, boys, like this character doesn't really seem all that hot, right? They've
Yeah.
done this
Yeah.
for the past, like, ever since Genshin was a thing, actually. Ever since we started like getting Omega massive leaks about future content from even year one of the game, because we all know MiHoYo has a problem with not being able to handle leaks properly. But again, side tangent. Um, the point is that it's definitely not that's definitely not as true anymore, because you have members of gotcha communities who go in and take either future content or hell even current content that not a lot of players have access to, because these are like premium characters or whatever, and they analyze them, and then they tell the rest of their community, like, yeah, we think that based off our calculations, not to sound too nerdy or anything, but based on our calculations, we think that these characters are pretty good or pretty bad or whatever else, right? I know a whole lot about FGO, so I can tell you, even though I don't play JP at all, you give me a JP server that came out in like the last 2 years, I can give you my thoughts on, do I think they'll be good or not? What are they good at? What are they bad at? Are they a good servant overall? What would you use them as? And I would say I'd be pretty accurate on that, just because of my sheer experience and knowledge about FGO. Um, and so this is where the knowledge part comes in. If you happen to know a lot about the game, chances are you don't even need to have that character to begin with to know how to kind of have an idea how they operate. you don't always have to like roll for them specifically just to find out what they do. Especially if you know like all what their kit is like oh, what are their skills, what's their ultimate, like all that stuff. Um, it does help. I will say that it does help that newer gotcha games these days, the new age gotcha games, as I like to call them, at least have the decency to give you a preview, so that when they do arrive, when they do start, when they do get put into the game, even free to plays can go in there and be like, they can try them out a little bit, see what's up, see what they can do. And FGO and sometimes oftentimes other older gotcha games, you can't preview them at all, right? It's just you just roll. You even mentioned this in your own FGO review video. You gotta fucking roll them in order to see what they do in the first place, or even know what their kit is like outside of like looking that shit up on a third-party website. So I will say it's a lot easier these days on newer gotchas, but still, the older gotchas have been around for so long that a lot of players know how those games work, and so even for characters who aren't even in the game yet, or they don't even have, they can just look at them, look at their kits if we know them, and be like, oh, okay, like this servant seems pretty good, this servant seems pretty bad, or anything in between.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I know recently the gacha industry has been widely popularized, most likely starting with Genshin in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Now, given that the industry has been expanding rapidly, at least in the West, I'm sure you've noticed that back when you play or when you whaled a lot, has there been any places where times when whaling has been stigmatized, like people look down on you because you whale?
Oh yeah, always. Mm-hmm. I can
Because I
answer that.
think because the thing is, whales are an essential part of any live service game. You might
Mm-hmm.
not like it. You might think that their mindset is not very not very
Healthy.
good. Yeah, not very healthy, but you know that they must exist for the game to survive. So I guess my next question is, um, how has being a whale been stigmatized, and have you noticed that the stigmatization has become more acceptable now that gacha is more mainstream?
So, starting from the very beginning, whaling has always been stigmatized, even back when I played, and I'm sure it's always been that way even before then, too. I will say that, or I want to make it clear that I do think this is more of a Western problem, and when I say the West, I mean like, English-speaking countries. Whaling is, I want to say, a lot more accepted out in the East, right, in Japan, Korea, China, those
Hmm.
places.
Yeah.
So this is more of a Western issue. I don't want to call it a problem per se, but it can definitely be called an issue. But yeah, like I said, whaling has always been pretty stigmatized. I remember when I first started whaling and when I first started making content on FGO on my YouTube channel, back in 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
got a lot of shit from, no surprise, the subreddit, and among other people as well. I got a lot of shit from people who were like, "Oh, this dude spends a bunch of money on FGO. He's a fucking whale." Blah blah blah. Um, Out here in the West, I have noticed that there is a sort of free to play players. A lot of them, anyway, not all of them, of course. I'm sure there are chill, free to play players out there, but there's quite a few free to play players who make their free to play status a status symbol, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
pride themselves
Yeah.
on being free to play, that they see themselves as the quote unquote superior players just because they decided to not spend any money on the game, either because they can't, right? They just don't have the money to, which is fine, or they choose not to, which is also fine because I understand if you don't want to support like predatory, predatory business model, and gacha games are kind of that. No matter how generous a gacha can be, that you can always argue that a gacha system is predatory. I'm not going to argue against that. In fact, I would agree to varying degrees. But the problem for me, and I think other people should also see as kind of an issue too, is that the moment when people use their statuses as a way to put themselves on a pedestal so that they can call themselves better players, whatever that means, that's an issue, because right, because that just kind of sours the whole, I guess, community, I suppose. Like, it puts in
Yeah.
unnecessary tensions and like unnecessary cracks in a community that you'd rather not have. Especially the smaller a community is, the more susceptible it can be to, like, obviously infighting in community, like within the same community. Like, I don't want to call it like civil wars or anything, but like basically we don't need that kind of vibe in a gacha community.
Yeah.
We have enough.
Basically,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, if someone says like my way of playing is superior than yours.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't like that just on a on a personal level, right? We're all playing gotcha games here. We're all fucking stupid. One of the only differences between all of us is that how much money we decide to spend, and that's a purely personal decision, or at least it should be. And so like anybody out here like flexing that either they're free to play. This can also just for fairness' sake. This also applies to whales too. There are whales out there who see themselves as superior players because they have the money to spend on gotcha games, whereas other people don't. So it's not like it's only like one way. It definitely goes both ways. It's just that I see this more of an issue among free to play players simply because there's more free to play players than whales, right? So that should
Yeah.
kind of check out. And so yeah, back to the original point of whales being stigmatized. Yeah, even back in my day, back in my heyday with gotcha games, whales have always been stigmatized. They've been looked down on by not all free to play players, obviously, but quite a few of them who decide to do the whole free to play by the way thing. I'm sure you've heard of that one. And that ties into your one of your other points that you made about how whales are kind of the cornerstone of, or are one of the cornerstones of the community. Yeah. Some people need to pay for gachas, right? And those are going to be your whales. Because gacha games are based off the free to play model, right? These games are free, but developing content for them certainly isn't. So the money's got to come from somewhere. And so, if at least some of your players decide that it's worth their time, it's worth their money to whale a whole lot, then that means that none of the rest of the other players need to pay. And personally, I don't really mind that model because again, it's spending money on gotcha games is a personal choice. You don't have to do it most of the time, as long as the gotcha game itself is good enough not to like force its players to pay for anything. And so you do need whales, right? Because certainly the free to players aren't going to be paying for anything. It's in their name. They're free to play. And so I think that stigmatizing whales is not exactly a smart choice. I mean, if you do it ironically, that's one thing. But unironically hating on the people who are supporting your game, I don't know about that one, my dude. I've seen gotcha games fail because all their whales, all their players have stopped paying for content, and the game just doesn't make any money anymore, and their company decides that, or the developers or their publisher decides it's not worth running those servers anymore, and so they close down. Magia record. So, yeah, like that's an example of what happens when whales kind of leave your community. It's not because they in the Magi record cases. I'm pretty sure it wasn't because that their free to play players like made fun of their whales to the point where they chased all their whales out. That's not the case, I don't think. It was because of other reasons. But like that should illustrate just how important whales are to your community. So why are you shitting on them again? I'm not sure how smart that is.
Yeah. At least I'm not sure if because I remember in 2017ish, I believe we talked about this yesterday, but at least over in the West, there is a huge crackdown on like random loot boxes.
Right.
But it's weird because if you take a look at the gacha space, because back then it was still relatively underground, that no major Western outlet really talked about it.
Right.
I would say like part of the stigmatization is less to do with you spending money, but rather falling into like the trap that is gacha or gambling addiction.
I guess I can see why you put it why you would put it that way, but I would just like to point out that like the whole concept of like loot boxes and like this whole gacha-esque gambling stuff. Like that's not exactly a new concept, even to us Westerners, right? I would like to
Mhm.
point out
Yeah.
that trading cards have always been a thing, whether they're baseball cards or more popularly these days, like actual trading card games like Magic, Pokemon, that sort of thing. Streamers and content creators still keep doing like Pokemon card unboxings and stuff like that, and yet nobody seems to have a problem with that. Right, they're not stigmatized for oh you're gambling for like a super rare card that you don't even know you're gonna get. And why is that? Why aren't they stigmatized? Is it just because they're physical items so you can resell them? Well, guess what, buddy? Chances are you're not gonna get a super rare like $1,000 card either. So like what? Just because you have a chance? So you're telling me you have a chance? No, fuck your memes. You're not getting shit. Not for the most part. Right? You're not gonna get a
Yeah.
$10,000 card or that $1,000,000 like fucking magic card that who was it again? Post Malone bought for like a couple million or something like that, like a super rare magic card or something like that. I don't know the full details on that. I just heard about it.
Okay.
So it's like I'm not exactly like too convinced. Well, that's a bad way to put it. It's just like we've known about it, right? Us Westerners aren't completely ignorant of the whole gacha or like the loot box concept. It's just that, in my opinion, the reason why gacha games flew under the radar at the time was because, as you said, they were underground. They haven't hit mainstream yet. Gacha games were only just starting to like ramp up in popularity, and without Genshin specifically, it would have taken it a lot longer to hit mainstream. It's just that Genshin happened, and all of a sudden, post 2020, everybody's familiar with everyone knows, like, or at least a lot more people these days kind of know what a gacha game is. Not only that, but I would also argue that gacha games are also fundamentally different from like just loot boxes, because loot boxes, as we knew them back in 2017, they were just like part of a game, but the game itself wasn't a gacha game, right? Though most games were what I would call normal games in quotes, where it's like they happen to have microtransactions that included loot boxes in them. And so people decided not to. People decided, yeah, we don't really like these, or at least a lot of people out here in the West did. Whereas gacha games, these are specifically games that are designed around the gacha system. So fundamentally, they're very different. There was one more point that I wanted to make, but let's see if I remember it. If it comes back to me, I'll speak up again. But you can
Okay.
take it from
Yeah,
here.
no worries. I do, because I think I do agree that I think most people that do spend money on gacha games are financially responsible.
Mm-hmm.
I think gacha games only start to blur the lines of gambling if you start to lose control.
Yeah, for sure, for
Um,
sure. Mm-hmm.
but I assume that like for the course when you were like a whale, you knew what you were paying for.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I assume that every dollar that I spend on a gacha is a dollar that I will never see again. Um, I know exactly what I'm getting myself into. I have never agreed with like how expensive gacha packs are, but I do it anyway because that's this is where my passion lies. However, I will never beat around a bush about like how expensive gacha packs are. They're fucking expensive. There is no reason why we
Yeah,
should be paying
for sure.
$100 per fucking gem pack. Like we are paying every time we pay a pack for any gacha game, most gacha games anyway. We are basically paying either the equivalent or more than a triple A game. And as somebody who's like grown up with quote normal games, like every time I do that, that kind of blows my mind every single time. Obviously, with me having wailed on gacha games for so long, like I've gotten used to it. But even still, I've always been fully aware of the fact that these things are damn expensive. And why gacha games can get away with it? Shit, man, I'm part of the reason. Like, we let them get away. We let them get away with it.
Yeah, that's actually something because the more gacha games I review, the more I feel like I becomes more adaptive or less sensitive to this stuff. Because if you open up the cash shop in pretty much any new release,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna see a bunch of packs that's like 20, 50, $100. Because I think by this point, $1 for one pull is considered average.
Something like
Uh,
that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's weird because part of me wants to, critique it, saying that it's not fair. But I feel like if every single gacha game does it, then it just becomes normal. So I just don't talk about it anymore.
I guess so, but just because something is normal doesn't mean you shouldn't speak out about it.
For sure, yeah. It's but it really just makes you put into perspective that when you play a gacha game, your sense of money, your sense of how much you should be paying for just gets
Yeah, it's really
it gets
easy.
altered, it gets changed.
Yeah, it gets really easy to lose track. Yeah, that and people, once people start spending money, they keep making excuses to themselves, like, oh, like I already spent this much money. The whole sunk cost fallacy you mentioned earlier. People fall victim to that all the time, and so they just keep spending without really knowing why it is that they're spending, just because they want a new character or something like that. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So I know that even though you have been very financially responsible, has there actually been any instances where you regret your decision to like dump a lot of money? And has there been chances that you actually didn't get what you wanted?
Oh boy, this is a loaded question, especially for me personally. Overall, no. I don't regret the whaling that I've done personally. Now, I am like my case is unique to me. Or in other words, how I should put it is, if you ask other whales, they will have differing opinions too. I'm sure you can find a whale out there who's like, yeah, I kind of regret like spending this much money on this particular gotcha game or just gotcha games in general. But for me personally, because my rationale for getting into whaling in gotcha games to begin with was for the sake of obtaining new characters and leveling them up and then using them in game, right? By
Yeah.
definition, I do not regret what I did, because that's kind of the whole point of me whaling. So personally, I don't regret any of the money that I did spend. I guess the one way that I would say that I regret it, if I were to count this, is that 2 years ago I lost my original job due to a layoff that allowed me to whale in the first place, and I tried turning into like a gotcha content creator. Unfortunately for me, that hasn't really been working out over the past 2 years, and so a lot of my savings that I had saved up from that first job kind of like dried up, and so now I'm just kind of like surviving on fumes at the moment. So in that sense, maybe that I regret whaling on gotcha games, but still, gotcha games is my passion, and that I'm always gonna hold on to that. And so I
Yeah.
don't regret the money that I did spend, and I don't plan on like beating myself up over that, because the past is the past, now is now. And so I just keep trudging along, keep powering forward as I usually do, as I
Okay.
do with
Yeah.
my
No, I
gotcha
mean I
games.
respect that.
Yeah.
But it's something I find pretty interesting is that um, I mean I don't want to like single out FGO, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there have been a lot of times where people wailed, and even though they got what they wanted, they still felt cheated out. They still felt like, why the hell did I pay for that? Has that something you've noticed in like a community before?
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially in FGO, because before the pity, um, we have plenty of horror stories. Me and other FGO players and other old school gotcha players as well. Um, we have plenty of horror stories of just how absurd, like how like the absurd amount of money we've had to drop for like a single character before. My example that I mentioned to you earlier over Discord is that back in 2018, when we had the first summer event for FGO, mind you, this was before pity. Um, I had to drop 1,700 Saint Quartz for my first copy of Tama Lancer. Um, to put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of about $800, real U.S. dollars. And for perspective, I spent about $800 to get C6R1 Yoimiya in Genshin Impact. To be fair, I got very lucky with my Yoimiya pulls. Like I got a couple of early 5 stars, and I only got like spooked like once or twice, or I lost a coin flip like once or twice, and that was it. But still, like that should kind of give you like some sort of at least a little bit of perspective on how absurd FGO and other old school gotchas before the age of like standardized pity existed. That Um, the amount of money that we had to spend just to secure one copy of a character, any character, or any 5-star character that is, was insane. And while I might not say I regret it per se, I will still sit here and tell you that yeah, that is way too much to ask out of a gacha player, especially these days. And other whales in the community have definitely had far worse experiences than me. And if you were to ask them, perhaps they'll tell you, yeah, no, I shouldn't have done that. I don't think I should have whaled that much. Even whales who are veteran whales, especially in FGO, who have spent a lot of money before going for MP5s and shit like that, going for multiple copies of a servant, they can always, it used to be at least, they could always have a freak accident where all of a sudden their luck just goes all the way down to the negatives, and suddenly they're looking at spending literal thousands of Saint Quartz just to finish maxing out a copy of a servant. That's happened to me multiple times, and that's certainly happened to a lot of other people. And so, yeah, definitely, I would say that there are other whales out there who would look back on their purchases, on their whaling, and be like, yeah, I don't know if I should have done that.
Yeah, at least I remember, because I started playing FGO back when before it started having a pity as well. Um, the first I remember one of the major poll targets was Castoria. She came out in summer of 2022 for NA.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, pulling in FGO, it's without a pity, it kind of feels like there's a sense of dread just looming over you. It's like, what happens if you saved up all this time? Like, even if you're free to play, saving up currency still takes up a long time. You saved up all this time and you didn't get what you wanted. At least that kind of mentality was unique to FGO. And part of me said, if I didn't get this target, I would just quit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is quite common in a game like FGO. My favorite anecdote relating to this that I always like pulling up was the original mass exodus back during the first Halloween event of FGO. Because to put some context here, back when FGO first came out, our very first waifu banner of the game was Tamacaster, who first debuted in Halloween. She was supposed to be a permanent character that came out with the London story chapter, or the Fourth Singularity, I think. But then the game decided to put her out early as a teaser, sort of, as part of a limited time event. And so they decided to put it into the game as part of Halloween back then. And so because of that, because she was the first waifu banner of the game, a lot of players saved up for the first 3-4 months of the game just to roll on her. And so when the day came, when her banner finally dropped, we all went. A lot of people, a lot of the players went all in on her, just to get fucked. Because again, FGO has no pity. It's got a 1% SSR rates, and at those rates, you don't know what the fuck is gonna happen. And as a result, the subreddit and other FGO forums back then immediately got flooded with what I like to call salt boards of just comments on comments on comments on comments of just people bitching about how they spent this many Saint Quartz, how they grinded the game for all these months just to get shit on. And so a lot of the players just left, never to come back. They just quit the game cold turkey, and that was it. We never saw them again. Because that's when they learned just how cruel FGO's gacha truly was. It truly was you either got them or you don't, or you didn't. And if you didn't, you can go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Damn.
And so, yeah, I'll just say, just real quick.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry for cutting you off. Real quick, I just want to add, that's why your experience rolling for Castoria, that is completely valid, because that is a feeling that a lot of FGO players in the past have felt themselves. It is the exact same situation. And so had you not gotten Castoria back then, like, and you just quit the game altogether after spending all your Saint quartz. Hell, you could have even gotten Castoria, but as long as you spent enough more Saint quartz than you were comfortable with, if it cost you too much, I would have understood if you just quit the game even then. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, yeah, no, I totally get that. Because I know FGO eventually did implement a pity after a very, very long time. It's not a very good pity. But I guess as a gacha whale, then, what was your reaction to gacha games becoming more mainstream? And do you see that as it becoming mainstream more of like a positive or negative thing for the game? Because you could argue that because that gacha has become more mainstream and there are more competition, that FGO added a pity.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm of the opinion that one, pities are good for the overall gotcha scene. And two, that FGO eventually included their own pity in order to try to keep up with the rest of the gotcha landscape. I guess the rest of the gotcha market. Um, Let me elaborate on each point individually. Pities allow players to plan ahead, basically, especially with the way Genshin Impact implemented them. Right, when Genshin Impact first came out, it introduced and standardized the idea that the idea of a hard pity. Right, obviously unique to it, or maybe some other gacha games do this too. But it also has soft pity, so that kind of throws players an extra bone here. But at the very least, it has a hard pity, and what that does, along with its other gacha perks, such as alternating guaranteed rate ups, and the fact that your pity does carry over in between banners, like the game remembers how much you spent on a banner, and so it keeps your pity intact. All those mechanics together allow players to plan ahead. And in gacha games, the most anti free to play mechanic is knowledge. Or maybe the biggest advantage that free to plays have is knowledge, future knowledge specifically. In FGO, we call it clairvoyance as kind of a meme. But I'll use that term for other gacha games too, because it's basically the same concept. Clairvoyance is the biggest weapon that free to play players have, all players actually, but much more so for free to play players, obviously, that they have against the unknown nature of gacha, right? You don't know what's coming in the future most of the time, or at least you're not supposed to, right? Part of the FOMO of gacha games is that you don't know what's coming. So when they do arrive, right? It's like, oh my God, here's this brand new character who's super strong, and they're only gonna be here for 2 weeks, right? We have to pull for them no matter what the cost, right? We have to get them before they're gone. But if you have clairvoyance, either in the form of leaks or you play a gacha game that's 2 years behind the fucking JP server, FGO, you have that knowledge already. And so you don't have to freak out when you see a new character, right? Because you knew they were coming. So that eliminates a lot of the uncertainty of gacha games. And so pity works in a similar way, or at least like on a logical basis, it's pretty similar, where it's like, okay, well, this allows you to prepare ahead of time, right? Let's say MiHoYo announces for the next patch, right? A rerun character, or hell, even a new character, right? Then you can look at your pity and be like, okay, I have this much pity, I have this much currency. Maybe between now and when this new character banner comes out, I'll have gotten this much more currency, or at least I should expect this much more currency, and so I can make decisions on, do I want to roll for this character or not? Can I guarantee myself this new character? Blah, 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 all that stuff. In FGO and other older gacha games, before the age of standardized pity, you simply could not do that. At least not without, NA's, like the degree of clairvoyance that we NA FGO players had. That simply was just not an option. And so that's why I think pity is overall a good thing for gacha games, right? So that if there's a character you really, really want, then the inclusion of mechanics like pity give you a much better chance, especially as a free-to-play, to be able to go out of your way to get them. Sorry, what was the second thing that I made? The second point that I
Yes,
mentioned, if you remember.
it's alright. So basically, because as gacha games are becoming more mainstream,
Mm-hmm.
um, I guess I mean this can kind of flow into the next question.
Sure, yeah.
So as you know, because if you have a lot of players coming in, they're just going to have, I guess, the perception surrounding gacha games, with whatever is the newest release one. So I guess like alongside gacha games becoming more mainstream, what do you see as one of the most major misconceptions about gacha games for someone that just got introduced to it like today?
Oh, the biggest one is that gacha games are pay to win easily. I mean, anytime I go into a like a non-gacha stream, right?
Hmm.
Say I go into Asmongold's stream and Asmongold starts talking about gacha, for example, for whatever reason. Guaranteed, half his chat, if not more, is gonna immediately start going, Omega lol gacha, right? Oh, the pay to win gacha, stuff like that. That is the single biggest misconception about gacha games, and it's understandable because again, out here in the West, we Westerners have our predisposed position against gacha games because we essentially see them as like glorified loot boxes, right? And as a whole, especially in the gaming scene, in the gaming audience or the community rather at large, we don't really like microtransactions, and so we don't like loot boxes either. And because we've seen how AAA studios out here have ruined loot boxes and have made them very predatory, sometimes even extremely pay to win. Right, you got to pay money to acquire the best content, so you have an advantage over other players in game. That sort of thing. And so, like whenever non-gacha players look at gacha games, the first thing that a lot of them think is, oh, they're pay to win, because they see a gacha game, right? A game or a genre rather that focuses on you spending a currency, either in-game or real, sometimes even both, in order to acquire a character, which is essentially paywalled most of the time. So they see that like, oh, okay, gacha games are pay to win, right? When in reality, most gacha games are not like that, simply because, well, gacha games can't even be pay to win if they don't even have any PvP. So that whole argument, and most gacha games, I would say, don't have any PvP, and even if they do, it's not very serious. The whole pay to win argument is already moot from the very beginning, and yet people insist on saying that gacha games are somehow pay to win anyway. Yeah, so I would say that's the biggest misconception.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at least I feel like starting with Genshin, it's probably the biggest one that kicked it off.
Yeah, of course.
But aside from being just the gacha system by itself, there are also other like predatory tactics, such as daily missions or monthly passes that motivate you to come back every day, habit
Yeah.
formation.
Hmm.
So I guess alongside the misconception of it being pay to win, would you say that gacha games having a lot of these predatory practices is also like tagged on as a reason, or is it just because that people think that they're pay to win?
I would say it's more because it's pay to win. Even though, yes, I do agree that Gotcha's doing like dailies and battle passes, weeklies, monthlies, what have you, like other utilizing tactics to keep you playing, um, are kind of shitty. Sure. Gotcha game. I think that gotcha games should be as non-committal as possible. Um, I don't think that's as big of an issue because people will play what they want to play anyway. There are plenty of gacha players out there who don't play every day, even though you're supposed to, right? Plenty of new age gacha players just log on their gacha games either whenever they feel like it or whatever, because most people aren't degenerate ass gacha players like I am, right? A lot of the average gacha player, I would assume, doesn't like religiously grind their gacha games every day. Simply because of the fact that most people don't want to play gacha games all the time. They want to do other stuff. They want to do other stuff. Watch anime, watch YouTube videos, hang out with friends, talk, play other video games that aren't fucking gacha games. People don't want to just play gacha games all the time. You'd have to be a special breed of autistic in order to do that. Me, for example. So I would say that that's not as big of a factor. Not only that, but people who have favorite video games they play, they'll just keep playing those games even though they don't have any dailies, right? People play. I don't know if World of Warcraft or other MMOs have dailies. I'm sure they do, but like, do they have them to the extent that Gacha games do? I'm not sure. And even if we're not talking about MMOs, if you have a video game that you want to play, you're gonna just play that, even if you play Gacha games, right? Most people don't want to feel what's the word that I can use here? Most people, I would say, don't want to feel like fenced in by one particular thing that they like doing, right? Yeah, you might like gacha games, but you don't want to have to play them every day. At least that's not what a lot of people like. So even though they play gacha games, they won't play it for a day or two. They'll just go do something else, and then they'll come back to gacha games whenever they feel like it. So yes, gacha games do have FOMO like tactics, like dailies and stuff like that. But those aren't as big of a factor in my opinion, as opposed to the other thing we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, at least I have a rule for myself. Is that the most of my gacha games that I still play like on an ongoing basis, I typically just went full free to play. So, for example, like Nikkei, where sometimes I log into Withering Waves, because at least something I feel is if you just don't pay for anything, if you
Right.
don't pay for the monthly pass or the battle pass, like the Welkin, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then you have less of an incentive to log in. Because even if you spend as little as $5 for the Welkin, you feel as if you almost have an obligation to log in every day.
Right.
Otherwise, you will lose out on the bonus.
Right. Of course.
At least, because in my opinion, I do think the predatory practices do play a bigger part. But this is just coming from someone that majored in psychology.
For sure. And yeah, I'm just one guy, so of course and I play gacha games at a level that very few others do. So obviously everything I say, there's a good chance that I can't speak for everyone. Of course, I'm not trying to speak for everyone in the first place, but yeah, you are right. It could be that oh yeah, the FOMO practices do have a bigger impact on people than I think they do. But I suppose that's like a small, like, maybe, disagreement. Disagreement is kind of a strong word there. But maybe varying takes on this for sure.
Yeah, and I guess alongside the ridiculous pricings of the different packs, that's also something that I find a little bit difficult to talk about in my review videos. Because if every single game does like a Welkin or like a battle pass or daily missions, other ways for you to get back to playing every day,
Mm-hmm.
then it's hard to critique every individual one of them because all of them are doing it.
Right.
And I feel like, well, do you feel as if this kind of thing should be normalized, as in like it shouldn't be too big of a deal, or do you think it's still a good idea to call out these games that still do it, even though literally like every single new gacha release does it?
Yeah, exactly. I'd say, for me personally, because I am a whale, right? It should not surprise you that I think that monthly passes, battle passes, that those sort of things are perfectly fine. I don't find any problem with gacha games putting out these kinds of things, especially because I come from FGO, which to this day does not do any of those things. And that's the kind of game that would benefit massively both the developers and the players themselves. Well, developers, maybe not, but the players for sure, certainly, would benefit massively from. And they're the one game that doesn't do this. So it's like, yeah, of course, I'm gonna see monthly passes and battle passes as like a good thing overall. However, these are still microtransactions at the end of the day, right? These games are still like kind of pushing these things on you as like good, like high value items, especially with the battle passes, the paid battle passes for most gacha games. Most of them like give you access to like something that's really, really valuable that you simply cannot access as a free to play. In Genshin, you've got, the battle pass specific 4-star weapons that all have crit rate main stat, which is insane. And we can go on and on about that. All gacha games have like some sort of special unique equipment that you can only get from paying, to at least $10 for the battle pass. So I understand if, for example, in your case, if you don't want to have to keep calling them out over and over and over, that's fine. Maybe what you could do is like just like mention, oh yeah, by the way, there's a battle pass for this game as always. But if you don't want to, waste time mentioning that because it's just kind of assumed they have one, then sure, that's understandable. Um, I would still say that, you know, I guess I can see both ways on it. Like on one hand, my whale side sees these things as like, oh yeah, these are really good value. You should buy these all the time. If you want to support the game, that is obviously you don't have to if you don't want to. But if you want if you want a good value out of your money, then sure, go ahead. But on the other hand, my more normie side, if you can call it that, does say, well, yeah, you should still call these out because they're still microtransactions at the end of the day.
Yeah, no problem. No, I can totally see that. But I kind of just stopped talking about it because it's just become so normalized.
Yeah.
At least, my way of playing is that I either go free to play where I just lightly spend.
Right. Right.
I know some people might be more comfortable with dropping more money.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my last question for the day is, what would you say to those that are still on the fence about dropping like their next $80 to $100 on a game? Do you think it's going to really affect them that much, or you should just drop it as in whatever?
Well, obviously, that's a very personal question. That depends on, well, basically who's asking. Um, if you have, I always say that if you want to whale, well, first of all, make sure you have the money to waste, right? Treat this like gambling. Don't spend money you cannot afford to spend, right? Especially in gacha games because you're basically never going to see that money back. It's not, at least in real life gambling, you at least have a small chance of getting your money back. Here, there's no chance outside of like what doing some shit like refunding your gacha account, all the money you spent on your gacha account through like what the Apple Play Store or like the Google Play Store. But if you do that, then the developers will immediately ban your account for charging back, basically. So yeah, that's kind of a severe consequence. So besides weird situations like that, don't spend money that you don't have. At least not at the moment. And if you do have money that you're comfortable parting ways with, right? They call this disposable income or something. Like if you truly enjoy a game, right? Even if you're super casual and you just want to pull for the characters because you just really like a character, if they're what makes you happy, then sure, go ahead. You should be able to spend that money as long as it's money you can afford to spend, and ain't nobody out there should be able to tell you that what you did was like the wrong choice. That, oh, you decided to spend money on this game. You're such a fucking loser. How cringe, or whatever people say. Whaling in gacha games is a very personal thing because gacha games are very personalized, or at least that's kind of how they're designed to be, to appeal to get players like personally. With all their characters and stuff, right? Because they're kind of the whole point. Oh, you want to roll for waifus and husbandos and all that stuff. So if you really want a particular character, and the only way you can get them, or an easier way to get them is by spending money, sure, go ahead, right? You shouldn't have to be judged for that. If that, but however, if it turns out that like spending money becomes like a psychological problem to you, then you should probably stop doing that. Because at that point, if it's psychological, if it's something mental, then yeah, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to control that. But as long as you are, as long as you can, control yourself, as long as it's something that you can afford, shouldn't be anything wrong with that. And so, you should do it. Maybe if you're in a position, if you're the kind of person where you don't like spending money on gacha just on a conceptual basis, like you don't want to support, again, like I said earlier at the beginning, you don't want to support like predatory business practices or whatever, but you really want this character, I would say like it doesn't hurt spending that money. You're only one person, and despite me saying that, yeah, gacha games are usually monetized very, like in a very predatory fashion. Me saying that isn't gonna change shit, right? The only way for us to change, like gacha industry norms is by either like, dare I use this word, boycotting these games and not spending any money on them, or at the very least, and well, better yet, stopping our playing them entirely cold turkey, or just waiting for a long enough time where gacha games evolve to the point naturally where their predatory practices become less and less predatory. But obviously, the second option is going to take is going to take much longer. Obviously, so even if you're like against spending money on gacha games because microtransactions and all that, I would still say like make yourself happy. Just spend that money. I'm gonna be that devil on their shoulder. Yeah, who cares, man? If it's only a one-time thing, sure, there ain't no problem with that. Just if you're the kind of guy or the kind of girl to say that, oh, I don't want to spend money on gacha games because they're predatory, and you do it once, and then that unleashes the floodgates for you, then maybe you should stop saying they're so predatory. Then, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
that would be my stance.
For sure. At least I've definitely felt that way as well. I'm not sure if you count this as I mean, it's definitely not whaling, but I spent $60 for the the 2B skin from Nikkei. The skin gacha.
Understandable. I did so too.
Yeah. At least that was I mean, I have spent on like the biggest pack in Genshin like once. I think it was during one of their anniversaries just to, reward myself, I guess. I guess that was, but the 2B skin was probably one of my biggest dips in spending. And I've said to myself that I will never pay for a skin gacha again.
Yep. Yeah, $60 is always too much. Yeah, too much. My personal opinion is that skins in gacha games should cost no more than $20, and if it's gonna cost $20, they should also come with like freebies, like extra gacha pulls or other materials and resources and stuff like that. Thankfully, Nikkei does do that with their mission passes, where it's $20, but then you get other stuff too alongside their skins. So I agree. I don't have a problem with that, but yeah, Nikkei's skin gacha is probably a step too far.
Yeah, no, but I do think self-control plays a very, very big part of it.
Yeah, of course.
Because I mean, I find this topic fascinating, and that's one of the reasons I went into gacha games is just seeing how psychologically they work and how they affect players. I would say even if you can't legally define a gacha game as gambling, you can still be vulnerable to the tactics because
of course.
You can definitely argue that there are elements of gambling within it.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, but I guess that's my final message to everyone that's still just playing gacha games is that gacha games can be fun. I have made a few videos in the past where I criticize a lot about the tactics of gacha games, but I think if you really understand what you're doing and you practice a lot of self-control, you can still have a lot of fun in these games. And that's why I make content on it.
Yeah, I say that as long as you know what you're getting yourself into, which, to be fair, if you just start off on gacha games, it's really hard for you to like grasp that. It's one of those things where it's like you kind of have to do it yourself in order to really understand, okay, this is just how bad it can get. But at the same time, it's like, as I still have to say, as long as you know what you're doing, or as long as you are prepared. I guess a better way to say this for like newer gacha players who haven't spent money yet but maybe are thinking about it. As long as you are prepared for what is about to happen, and you are willing to accept the consequences that come your way, sure, go ahead and wail. But if you are not, if you don't think you're prepared, if you don't think you can control yourself, once you spend money for the first time, and that again unleashes the floodgates for you, so to say, then maybe hold back.
No problem. Yeah. But I think that's a pretty strong note to end off.
Sure.
So I want to thank you two once again for coming on today.
No problem.
I know you made quite a lot of gacha games on your channel, so if anyone's interested in seeing the gacha god himself in action, just be sure to check him out.
Appreciate it, Mr. Pseychie, and yeah, pleasure to be on to answer a couple questions, and yeah, maybe if you need another interview from me at any time in the future, just let me know. Hit me up.
All right, for sure.
All right, thanks everybody, and we'll catch you guys next time.